So in today's video, I wanted to recommend a lens filter that I've really enjoyed using. I've been using these for maybe a year and a half now, and I've really liked them, and I've really integrated them into a lot of my photos and video footage. This right here is called a diffusion filter, and these are great for diffusing light and scattering light before it hits the lens. This slightly softens things and helps to take really bright areas of the image and scatter them a little bit. This really helps bring back a look that you would get out of a lot of film stocks or a lot of vintage lenses, just maybe to a slightly more extreme degree. If you're looking at a diffusion filter that's at a smaller strength like the one I'm using currently, which is a 10% Cinebloom, maybe like a 1/8 Pro Mist or something, that would be a little bit more subtle. This is a 20% right here, which I used for a long time before getting this 10%. And this is definitely a bit stronger, and I would argue even more strong than the bloom effect that you would get off of actual film that it's trying to replicate, or vintage lenses. Vintage lenses and actual film provide a much more natural version of this. However, this effect can be really stylized and really interesting if it's something you want to go for. And if you use it in a more dialed back version like I have on my lens currently, you can get a little bit more subtle of the effect to kind of slightly lean towards the look you'd get off vintage lenses or actually shooting film. If you expose for your highlights, what a lot of this can help do is just kind of soften the image, but if you allow your highlights to overexpose a little bit, it can help roll them off a little bit easier into those really overexposed areas. This helps to soften that really harsh curve that you get on digital cameras, where highlights will just clip immediately and there's just no information whatsoever. If you look at actual film cameras and actual film negatives, they just retain so much highlight detail in a way that digital just can't replicate. Unless, of course, you're looking at really high-end cameras with a lot of dynamic range, but even then they just can't roll off overexposed areas in the same way. And so this can help to kind of recreate that highlight roll-off if that's something you're looking for. So one thing to be aware of is what I mentioned earlier, and that's just the strength that you buy. These are pretty heavy-handed 20% or 1/4 strengths, so I would recommend maybe trying that and seeing if you like it or not, and then you can start to refine it a little bit and use something like a 10% or a 1/8. Another thing to be aware of with these types of filters is that if you're bracketing your images, combining exposures, or maybe you're going for a really HDR look where everything's exposed for, these can make this a little bit difficult just because the bloom effect can kind of mess with this and make things look odd. So if you're lifting your shadows a ton, it'll just reveal that bloom effect in a really ugly way, and if you're recovering a ton of highlight detail, it might not quite work out as well. And so what these are intended to do is in camera, you can roll off that exposure in your highlights. And so these are just really, really helpful if you want to get more cinematic looking video footage, or you want to get photos that have a more stylized look to them. This effect of rolling off the highlights can be really, really helpful if you're using a modern lens rather than a vintage lens, but you want to bring a little bit more character to it without necessarily sacrificing autofocus or a zoom range. So I would highly recommend trying diffusion filters. I think they're absolutely amazing. Just be aware that it's a filter and it's a baked-in look, so you can't just go and remove it later from your footage. So if you know that you're hesitant to use a filter and you know that you might change your mind later, try recreating the effect in your editing software instead, because you can get pretty close. I think that it does look better, especially if you're not as good at editing, if you can just do it in camera with filters like this. However, if you do want to change your mind, you might need that flexibility, but I would highly recommend trying these filters as they are just super awesome and you can definitely get some really good looking footage by using them. And so those are my thoughts on the Moment Cinebloom diffusion filters. I really like them. I think they're great and I've been using them for a while. But what do you think down below? Let me know in the comments what you think of diffusion filters. Do you think they're worth it or not? Otherwise, that's all I have for you today. So have a great day and happy shooting.